Destin. It's Mike, aka Sanaku from Overground, and welcome back to the channel. And welcome back to episode 4 of the Rainbow series. In this series, we cover our favorite decks, our favorite Digimon, our favorite archetypes, as we build initial first drafts based on our box openings, one of every color. So we've covered purple, we've covered red, we've covered blue, and now we've covered the color black. And today we're going to be going over my first draft at a black Diaboromon deck list. Yeah, Diaboromon is finally somewhat competitive after months and months of random releases where there was no real cohesion. I think we finally have an actual Diaboromon archetype, and I'm super pumped for that because Diaboromon, fan favorite, introduced in our war game, stuck in our brains ever since 2000 for many of us living in the States. And yeah, it's just been a good Digimon, been a good time, and a lot of very powerful effects. Very much focused on token generation, which is probably the first time anything in Digimon has been focused on that so heavily, and every incarnation of Diaboromon continues to focus on that trend. So let's go ahead and get into the card by card, because this one is probably a little bit different than something that you might have seen before. And if you have seen it before, I'm sorry, it just seems to be the most consistent version for me. So let's go ahead and look at the baby. So we have 4 copies of the BT5 Sumamon. This is the on-attack decoration. If you have an unidentified type, you get to draw one. And 1 copy of the BT2 Sumamon, whereas if you have a Digimon with the same name, you get plus 2,000. Now, there is an argument to swap this ratio, because DP increases kind of matter at the end of the day when it comes to Diaboromon, because your Diaboromon top end is generally going to die when it swings into security. So you kind of want to make the most out of it. However, plus 2,000 only brings it up to 13, and the number to beat this format is 15. There's a lot of Omnimons in the format. As you know, Battle of Omni was the name of the last set, and we introduced a bunch of new Omnimons into the format, which either go between 14 and 15. And if this deck does take off, Armageddon himself is also 15. So having that single DP buff up to 13,000 really doesn't make a difference. So me, personally, I'd rather have the extra consistency with the draw power with these babies than I would with the DP boost. Moving on to our rookies. We're playing 4 copies of the Caramon from BT5. This is where on play we get to look at the top cards of our deck. We get to add an unidentified type as well as one Arada Sonata, which is one of our new tamers, coming from the Cyber Sleuth gang, along with Takumi and Nokia. Then we're playing the BT2 Caramon as well. This is the Caramon where if a Digimon with the same name is played as an Herald, we get to draw 1 card. Then this is probably the weirdest inclusion of the deck, and I was struggling to kind of figure out ways to round out my rookies. I was playing 4 copies of the promo Caramon just to have an additional name to search off the BT5 Caramon, but I found that it just never came up. The extra 1,000 on your opponent's turn means nothing if you're not playing a blocker-based deck, and the only blocker in this deck is Shademon, which we're going to get into very soon. So it felt kind of disingenuous to play it in the first place, and it costs 3, and so I figured, why not play a card that costs 2 instead to just help with memory manipulation? And another reason we're playing it is because a lot of the times, in the early games of this format, I found a lot of times my opponent will leave me at 2, specifically, because there's a lot of 2-cost evolutions for champions, so they evolve into their 1 rookie for free, then they evolve into their champion for 2. I can play Commandramon and then immediately evolve into the Kurisaramon, which we're going to get to allow me to accelerate my Arada into play faster. And then finally, 2 copies of Chumon, and this is just to help with any deck that has memory manipulation. We want to shut that down. We want to make sure that they can't use Hammer Spark. We want to make sure that they can't do anything like the new Garurumon and Greymon engines to help them get those Digivolutions for cheaper, to get that memory back, etc., etc. So, as we mentioned, we're playing 4 copies of the BT5 Kurisaramon. This is where on Digivolve, if we do not have an Arada in play, we can play one from our hand for free. But it also has the neat inheritable where if a Digimon with the same name as this Digimon is put into play, it gains Rush. And that's important because if we play a Diaboromon token, well, we already have a Diaboromon in play, that token immediately is going to be granted Rush because it shares the same name, being in this case Diaboromon. And this helps us close games out a little bit faster. And this is what I mean when I say that DP doesn't necessarily matter anymore, because if you're going to be going on a strategy where you're going to be token rushing your opponent, the DP doesn't generally matter because all the tokens are just going to be dying in the security anyway, and your top end isn't going to matter anyway because its sole purpose was to produce tokens, and once you've done that and you've attacked with those tokens, you've pretty much gained as much value as you possibly can out of that stack and out of that kind of interaction. Then we're playing 4 copies of Shademon. This is a new blocker from BT5 that has the unidentified type, so it is searchable off of Caramon, and I think it's one of the few, if the only, non-Diaboromon line unidentified Digimon in the game so far. And what's cool about Shademon is that not only is it a blocker, but if it's hit in security, it can actually basically special summon itself. So it gives you an additional body to help you stop your opponent's attacks and keep you alive, and it also gives you an extra body that you can evolve up the chain to set up another Diaboromon. And finally, we're playing 3 copies of the BT2 Kurisaramon. This is the inheritable where where if we have another Digimon with the same name comes into play, we get to gain 1 memory. So every time we span another token, this isn't once per turn, we get to gain an additional memory for every single one. And this helps us ensure that we can go up our chain to Diaboromon and not end our turn while consistently spamming tokens. Then going on to our ultimate lineup, I'm not quite sold on this ultimate lineup yet. I've tested it quite a bit, or sorry, not quite a bit, not yet. This is one of the few decks we haven't quite tested yet, and so I'm not quite sure if this is correct, but again, if anyone in the comments would like to point anything out to me, please let me know. But right now, we're playing 4 copy of the Warumonzemon, just to give us some additional speed to get into a Diaboromon ASAP. I figured the 5 cost was beneficial, because if you are breaking or you're in a situation where you just need to get to that right away, and you're missing potential pieces, like you're missing a champion, you can just slap the Warumonzemon down and then follow up the Diaboromon on the next turn. I felt like that was pretty much too good to ignore, and the 2 cost to evolve in combination with all your other potential memory manipulation with your Kurosarimon's and stuff, I felt that it helped you get to your end goal a little bit faster and a little bit more consistent. However, I do really like the idea of this Inframon here, which is you can evolve into a Diaboromon for 1 cost less. However, that's only applicable in the battle area, whereas Warumonzemon allows you to evolve into your raising area for essentially that exact same cost. So there's pros and cons to each one. And then to round out the ultimate lineup, there's the other copy of BT5 Inframon, and this is the inheritable, where if this stack on deletion, we get to replace it with a token, which again goes hand in hand with the baby Sumamon argument versus the DP, because if we do have a stack with this underneath it and it does die in security, it just gets replaced with another token, so it still floats and we still get to maintain that board presence and advantage. Then we're going to move on to our Megas. We're playing 4 copies of the BT5 Diaboromon. This one's really cool because this one on Digivolution, you get to generate a token immediately. You no longer have to declare an attack like you did with the BT2 Diaboromon. This will just instant gratification. You just get free token on Digivolution. Bam, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Here's a clone. Here's a copy of myself. And then we're going to be comboing that, rather. Now I'm thinking I've got tokens in my head. With 2 copies of the promo Diaboromon. I personally believe that this Diaboromon is superior, especially when we get into talking about Arada, because this one gives you security attack +1 for every Diaboromon in play, and that includes tokens. So it's always going to get security attack +1 by default by himself, but for every additional token that you have in play, this thing could potentially become a house. And even if it does have the potential to die in your opponent's security stack, it doesn't matter, because you're generating a ton of advantage through your additional tokens, and what this Diaboromon does is that it just threatens a huge push against your opponent. And your opponent's more likely inclined to block this because they don't know how far those security checks are actually going to take them at the end of the day. And if they don't block, they could potentially be put in a situation where now you're threatening lethal much faster than they anticipated. And if they don't have a blocker in general, no matter how you roll the dice, you're putting your position in a very precarious situation, because you're going to be putting them in a much faster lethal situation, because as you continue to spam tokens, you're always basically presenting lethal with every turn that passes, because you're always going to have 3, 4, maybe even 5 attacks, depending on A, how many tokens you can generate, and B, if you have rush, and even C, if you have access to something like Armageddon in your hand in combination with those tokens, which we're going to talk about right now. So Armageddon is it's a 15 cost to play, and it's 3 cost to evolve over a white or black Digimon, and that's important because Diaboromon has primarily been white up to this point, except for the promo, which is the only colored Diaboromon that we have in the game right now. And it itself has rush. However, if you destroy a Diaboromon on your field, you can play it for 12 less. So Armageddon can come into the field for 3, and it gains rush. So it's basically a 3 cost rush, a 3 cost Bushiagumon at the end of the day for the cost of a Diaboromon token. And even if your Diaboromon tokens themselves do not have rush because you don't have the proper Kurosarimon in source, you can always generate a token and then slam down the Armageddon and basically treat it as if it had rush in the first place. And Armageddon is 15,000, so it's likely to always survive. But what makes Armageddon really important for this deck is its static ability that during all turns, the when Digivolving effects of level 7 Digimon do not activate. And this is primarily to counter any flavor of Omnimon, because any version of Omnimon basically shuts this deck down if you do not have Armageddon in play. Regular Omnimon can clear an entire board, because pretty much your entire board is always going to be named Diaboromon at any given point in time. Alter S can clear an entire board because your tokens are always going to come in play at 3k, so it can pretty much just wipe you down and then digivolve the other stacks that you have. And if you didn't set up your stack properly, where you could potentially get wiped out by the 5k threshold of Alter S, that's huge as well. And the new Blitz Omnimon even further can put yourself in a situation where even if you're down to 0 security, your opponent can just go into Blitz and end the game. And then even on the non-blue and red side, Thwart is very powerful because it can help your opponent set up ways to deal with your extra tokens through their Digimon destruction effects with like Chimeramon and stuff like that. And then you've also got Millenniumon, which is very powerful because that's a level 7 as well, that can just do instant removal, and it's a very sticky bugger to deal with. So Armageddon is pretty much your big safety net against any big level 7 threat that your opponent could potentially use to turn the tide against you. And because it's so easy to get into play, there's no reason not to play multiple copies. And the best reason for it is that it's also an unidentified type. So you can actually search it off your Karamon as well, which is insane. So I might want to play 4 eventually, but I think 3 is the sweet spot because I can search it comfortably and I can potentially draw into it comfortably with the amount of evolutions that I'm doing on a regular basis. But Armageddon is definitely one of the reasons why Diaboromon is on the map, and it's one of the things you really have to look out for as a non-Diaboromon player, because Armageddon can literally ruin your entire game plan. So now we're going to talk about Arada. And he's one of the most interesting tamers that we've had released so far. I was originally playing 4 copies of him, but I tried to take one out to make space for the little yellow engine that we're going to talk about very soon. And unlike other tamers where if you set a specific condition, like the dual tamers, you get +2 memory, or if you are under the 3 threshold, you just go to 3 automatically, Arada just reads that if you have a card with unidentified in your trash, you get to start the turn with gain 1 memory. So that means no matter what happens, you're always guaranteed to start with 2 memory if you have 1 Arada in play. And if you have multiple, that continues to stack, and then you're potentially going to reach like a Shademon Kari situation where you could start the turn with 4, 5, 6 memory, depending on where they put you. Is there an argument for 4 Arada in order to make sure that you can get multiples in play quickly to hit that 3 or more memory threshold? Yes. What would you take out? Well, we're going to talk about that soon, because a lot of what you see here in the bottom is kind of subjective and it can be moved around based on your personal preferences. But the other reason why Arada is so good is that anytime you digivolve into a Diaboromon, you can suspend Arada to generate an additional Diaboromon token. And we didn't really talk about the token stats yet. We just kind of talked about the fact that they're 3k. But it's important to note that Diaboromon tokens are level 6 white Digimon with a cost of 14 and 3,000 mega unidentified, etc., etc. But the fact that they're level 6 is important too, because a lot of people are playing stuff like Takumi to shut down rush strategies. And what Takumi reads is that level 3 Digimon, when you declare an attack, you have to pay 1 memory. But tokens are not level 3s, they're considered level 6s, so they actually get around Takumi. And even if you spam the board and rush with tokens, you can still attack with tokens successfully without having to worry about pushing that memory counter closer and closer over to the opponent's side. But that's not the main takeaway with Arada. The main takeaway is the fact that he's an additional way to keep generating tokens consistently and reliably. And outside of something like Omnimon's Zwart Defeat, your opponent cannot interact with Arada in the same way that they could with the rest of your Diaboromon stack. So you're generally always going to be able to produce tokens turn after turn after turn and keep threatening that lethal game shot that we talked about. And in speaking with that, that's why I'm playing this small little yellow package. Because DP does matter in some respects if your opponent has a big board of their own. And outside of Armageddon, your Mega Diaboromons are generally never going to be able to take out your opponent's Megas. And that's why we play stuff like Starmons and Spiral Masquerade. So Starmons, if you're unfamiliar, because they're pretty much part of the new Lord Nightmon package, for every Digimon that you have in play, one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 1,000 for the turn. So if you can spam a bunch of tokens and you can get 4 or 5 Digimon in play super easy, you can just slap down Starmon, give something minus 5k, and then you can actually run it over with one of your Diaboromons, or depending on where their stat line is, any other one of your Digimon, depending on where your line in your evolution chain is as well. And to combo that, we're also playing 2 copies of Spiral Masquerade, because if we have a Starmon in play, Spiral Masquerade can pretty much finish off what Starmon started, and because now we have a yellow in play, we will be able to play Spiral Masquerade. Spiral Masquerade is also really cool to hit insecurity if your opponent's trying to rush you out if they know that you are threatening lethal, and that can actually shut down their game shot as well, because Spiral Masquerade minuses 3,000 for every Digimon you have in play. And again, if you've got 4 or 5 Digimon out, do the math, it adds up really quickly. You can start taking out a lot of big numbers. And Spiral Masquerade is also similar to something like Shademon, where for every Digimon you have in play, it's an instance of 3,000. So you can actually spread that damage as well, which is really, really, really strong. Now, alternatively, there are the 2 new black options that have been released in BT5 that complement Diaboromon decks as well. The one is that you can de-digivolve someone by 2 and then play a token. It's the 4 cost. I can't remember either one of their names right now. But the other one is, I believe it's called Ultimate Flare, is the 8 cost. And that's where you de-digivolve 2 and then everything that's a play cost of 3 or less is destroyed. So it's kind of like an option form Alter S. And it helps kind of keep your opponent in check by keeping their board kind of empty, and it allows you to keep kind of frolicking about with your tokens without having to worry about any general opposition. I found those options to be a little bit more inconsistent, and I found that this package was just better in general to help me deal with my opponent's threats directly, as opposed to having to go through like de-digivolve shenanigans, because especially with stuff like, Alteris mode and Sagittarius mode that we talked about in other Rainbow Series videos, and Shoutmon deck specifically, there's ways to kind of keep increasing your stack to outplay that like source control stuff and to outplay that de-digivolution mechanic as well. But yeah, this is going to be my first draft of a Diaboromon deck list. There is always going to be room to improve, and for anyone who has a lot more experience with this deck, I highly encourage you to reach out and leave a comment below to let me know if I'm on the right track. If you did like this video, for someone who's watching this who may not be familiar with Diaboromon, if this is your first time seeing something to do with Diaboromon, if you liked what you saw here today, please feel free to like the video, and always make sure to comment to let me know anything that you think or that you see that you've experienced throughout this entire video. We love reading your comments, we love interacting with the community, and we love chatting with you guys. If you like what we do here at Overground in general, please consider giving us a subscribe and help us reach our next milestone goal. This has been episode 4 of the BT5 Rainbow series. We're covering the color black, and it's a black Diaboromon deck list. Please join us next time when we explore the color yellow for the next episode of the Rainbow series. Take care.